Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sanda Ojiambo, CEO and Executive Director, United Nations Global Compact; Eric Loeb, Executive Vice President, Government Affairs, Salesforce Inc., LLC; Kathryn Kross, Executive Director, Communications, United Nations Foundation; and Richard Edelman, President and CEO, Edelman.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Balancing Business and Politics while Improving the State of the World. As you heard, my name is Kathryn Kross. I'm the Executive Director of Communications at the UN Foundation. I'm joined today by three guests who will help us understand the power of partnerships between businesses, governments, and civil society. Today's conversation is especially timely given what we've all experienced these past 8 months and are still experiencing with the COVID pandemic. We've seen businesses, governments, and civil society rush to support their customers and constituents in new and innovative ways, partnering across sectors in the process. So with the help of these three leaders, we hope to learn what's worked, what's standing in the way of progress, and what can be done about it. We've heard some introductions already. I'm going to get right to it. Thank you all for being here today. Within the last year, cross-sector partnerships were hugely successful in areas such as vaccine production and distribution. However, not everyone has shared in that success, and lesser developed regions especially have remained increasingly vulnerable and disproportionately undervaccinated. Eric, I'd like to begin with you. As we look towards the 2030 agenda, how can we ensure that partnerships that address pressing challenges are serving and inclusive to all?
Well, thank you so much for the question, and it's wonderful to be together. Sanda and I were just actually having a little discussion about this as well. Clearly, one of the things that you start by recognizing is the critical nature of the partnership, because none of the different areas can do this work on their own. And your point about timing is fascinating, because there's just this irony over these last 18 months of, even during this time of fragmentation and trying to solve for the challenges of COVID keeps showing just how interconnected our fates are and the need to find these ways of working together. One of the things, just as a starting framework from a business standpoint, is to recognize the power that you have to drive change. And certainly for Salesforce, that's deeply instituted in our approach to work. And there are different ways to look at this. One, of course, is that there are the areas that are very close to your core competencies as a business, and you can focus on areas of change there. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, later. But at the same time, you shouldn't be fearful of doing other things when you see the opportunity where you can make a difference, even if it is not a core competency. COVID certainly presented that for Salesforce, and one of the examples when I think of that is the work that we began to do in terms of distributing badly needed PPE early on in the crisis, and still continuing to this day in parts of the world where the medical supplies are greatly in need. That is not, as you can imagine, a core competency for a business software company. However, when called upon, we found ways to work with our partners in government, partners around the world, taking what we knew how to do and to drive forward. So whether that was here in New York or San Francisco, delivering plane loads to India, most recently to Tahiti, we found even there that we could work across the different sectors and help make a difference. So don't be afraid of trying something new. Those marginal gains make a difference, and it builds a muscle that can lead to new ways of working.
Thank you, Eric. And actually, what you touched on, I have to ask Richard about the Edelman Trust Barometer, because there was one particular statistic in this year's release and about what people expect of CEOs' involvement. And Richard, if you can explain a little bit about that.
Well, what's happened in the last 2 years is that business has emerged as the most trusted institution in the world for the first time. And we've been following this for 21 years. And so 2 years ago, it was NGOs. About a year ago, it was government, because it was the only institution large enough to confront pandemic. And then it turned to business as of January, because business was seen as effective and ethical. And that's the key moment. And so CEOs are now expected to speak up and act on issues ranging from the validity of the election to diversity and inclusion to sustainability to the pandemic, and making sure that their employees are well taken care of, having a new deal in terms of wages, retraining, access to community colleges. All these things that historically government did are no longer being led by government. They're being led by business. And the new employer-employee compact actually says, I, as an employee, only will work for you as an employer if you stand up for these things that are good for society. So it's a fundamentally new deal for CEOs. They no longer can duck and cover and hope that it passes. We need more like Benioff and others who recognize the moment and see the necessity.
Sanda, I have it on good authority that your group, the Global Compact, has been meeting. What are you hearing from your members about the challenges that they face that might block the full implementation of the UN's 2030 agenda?
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of days. Well, actually on the second day of gathering, and we're holding what we call the private sector forum. So we're bringing together businesses from all across the UN Global Compact family, as well as governments, heads of state, and civil society organizations to really talk about this building back piece. I just want to reflect on the statistic that Richard spoke about, the trusted position that business holds. I think it's very important to look at a continued shift in the roles and responsibilities of business. As has been said, I think the expectations from citizens, from consumers, certainly from governments themselves for business continue to grow. I think one of the biggest learnings actually from the pandemic is that it is possible to reconfigure what traditional partnerships have been. It is possible for businesses to rethink what the role of business is, and we firmly believe that business should be involved in creating that additional value, getting involved in societal transformation, but also really looking at how business can collaborate differently. So it's an opportune moment, I think, for businesses to rethink. What the pandemic has also shown is you can be purposeful, be principle-led, and still be profitable. These three concepts are not at odds. Great opportunities lie in furthering partnerships above and beyond pandemics and emergency situations. We need to partner to address the climate crisis. We need to partner in the same way to address gender inequalities, social and racial inequalities as well. So, just to sum it up, I think great opportunities for business, great opportunities to rethink what partnerships should look like, because no one sector, no one entity can really solve the challenges that we have to face today.
Thank you, Sanda. I agree that public-private partnerships have been very effective in increasing access to capital, managing risks, and fostering sustainable innovation. But I guess what I'm wondering, and anyone can answer this, is how can businesses in the private sector maximize their involvement, particularly to address the investments necessary to achieve many of the sustainable development goals?
So for me, I look at a company like Unilever, and they change their product mix. They make sure that farmers make more money because they pay their suppliers at a better rate because they're going to have more premium product. They persuade consumers that, in fact, to take shorter showers or something like this. And they also, when they have to combine factories, they guarantee the employees jobs because they're going to retrain them or place them in other factories. So it's the full circle. And Alan Jope is very public as a leader in this area. And that kind of public leadership by CEOs is totally endorsed by the idea that there are now belief-driven buyers. People who are exercising brand democracy and speaking up by buying products from companies they think are doing good. And the same thing with belief-driven employees. I only want to work for companies, Starbucks, others, who take the straws out of the cups and redesign the cap so that it's effectively a straw. So, do the right thing. You'll get the right employees. You'll get the right customers. You'll also get the right investors, BlackRock and others.
Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. Eric, I suspect that Salesforce is at the center of many of these public-private partnerships, but I have to wonder, is there is there risks? What would you tell, other CEOs who say, I better just, stick to our day job here? How would you encourage them to get involved?
Well, the first part, and it builds on what Richard is saying, and that is trust is good for your business. And so start with that as a value and as a North Star of orientation for your work. So if you take an overly myopic view of what is good for your business, what is good for your finances, it may be very myopic, it may be very short term. If you take a broader aperture and say what is good for my employees, my customers, my community, my planet, for not only sustainable development goals, but a sustainable economy, a sustainable business environment, then your aperture of what you care about and will commit your resources to is much longer term as well, and it's broader. And then beyond that, to your point about prioritization, of course prioritization is important. So you should think about what are the areas that I can deeply impact because of what I do as a business. Now, you can impact SDGs around equality, gender parity, pay parity, of course, that's very immediate, that's in your employee base. You can drive progress on some of the most critical issues for our world, on climate change. So we think not only what can we do, we announced even today that we are net zero all through our supply chain, but we created a sustainability cloud. We created our own software cloud to help all of our customers, and whether public or private sector, to be able to actually see what their impact is and drive change through it. So that's an example of not just people, but product having an impact that's positive to the UNGC goals, the SDG goals. So start with trust, but then drive impact.
And I would imagine as you're creating these new products, you're creating them because there's a demand.
That's right.
Sanda, but back to what we were talking about earlier, if you had to summarize, what you're hearing in terms of big obstacles that your partners are encountering, what are those specifically? And are they universal or are they more kind of regional?
Yeah. Rosy picture notwithstanding, there are some significant obstacles. I mean, we are amidst and in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that the shift that the pandemic has caused, whereas yes, it has highlighted, inequalities in areas for work and for focus and partnerships, it's very clear a lot of resources have gone towards addressing the pandemic. And that, in and of itself, hopefully in the longer term, will address some of the larger inequalities we face. But we can't deny the fact that obviously the pandemic is one of the biggest challenges we faced. In terms of general progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, the pandemic has set us back in many years, in many ways, in terms of overall progress towards 2030. But above that, I just want to talk really about financing, because I think it's one of the biggest challenges towards achieving what we must around key issues. The climate crisis is one. It was great today to hear President Biden talk about this really firm and resolute commitment around making sure financing for adaptation and resilience comes through. The climate financing remains one of the massive challenges that we do have. The third, and you touched on it, Lily, was just the fact that across the world, across geographies, across continents, we are deeply divided in terms of opportunity, in terms of resources, and in terms of the challenges that we face. And I think it's great to sit with businesses like Salesforce. Richard spoke about Unilever, and the fact that through partnerships, through their supply chains and through their subsidiaries and affiliations, you are able to drive that positive impact, build partnerships that will have impact, across countries and across regions. So I think being able to take progress where it exists in one part of the world and be able to transfer those lessons learned and good practices through business and through supply chains to others is also something that I think is much needed. At a global level, the challenges we face around multilateralism, I think, are really important. International cooperation really must be strengthened so that countries can work together to share technologies, to share peoples, to be able to rebuild borders and get back to a world that aims to solve our global problems together. So for me, those would be some of the key challenges I think that we face.
Thank you, Sanda. I wonder, I too listened to, as many of us did, the president's speech before the UN General Assembly this morning. And I know among the converted, among those of us who believe that the SDGs are attainable and that though it'll be challenging, we might be able to attain them by 2030. Does anyone have the feeling that this is really widespread, though, in the larger body politic, in the larger business community? Any indications that you see that this idea that the decade is now is catching on?
I definitely see our clients deeply serious about the SDGs. They measure themselves and their executives on the basis of achieving these goals. They put out reports that are quite serious, PepsiCo, among others. But I do think the pandemic has really caused further inequality. And I really want to point this out. In New York, for example, in New York City, we have 10.2% unemployment, up from 5% before. And it's mostly people in service employment, hotels, restaurants, et cetera, because there's no travel and tourism, because a lot of people have chosen not to get shots, vaccines, and that's just insane. And I, for one, believe in a vaccine mandate for my company with a option for testing, but I don't want anybody coming back to the office who hasn't been vaccinated. And I think we should implement this through business in the next weeks because it's urgent. And if the U.S. has the vaccine availability, it's just a crime to not. And further, I also think we would take very seriously reskilling, because the next big wave is automation, and 20% of employees are going to be changed out in financial services and in retailing in particular. And you've seen this because of the pandemic. So if we don't retrain these people and throw them into government and say it's your problem, that's just wrong, and it's going to cause further mass class divide and all this hostility. We don't need that. Business should solve this problem.
Thoughts from you, Eric or Sanda?
Yeah, I think I just want to take a slightly different angle and just share some of the findings we had from a recent survey of about 1,000 CEOs globally. And it was really asking about what they felt some of the biggest imperatives and also challenges were around the goals and the 2030 agenda. And by and large, all of them recognized that if they did not lead their business sustainably, and that really is a reflection of the Sustainable Development Goals, then their business future and business forecast was pretty grim. So again, I think the pandemic period has served as a great learning lesson and reflection opportunity. But at the same time, we also found that business leaders in the Global South felt the weight of the pandemic and the challenges of the pandemic twice as hard as business leaders in the Global North. And that's where I say issues such as how businesses manage and support supply chain resiliency, look at their footprint across the world, look at some of the things around carbon emissions, about gender and inequalities across the entire business supply chain really can make a difference. But our 1,000+ CEOs definitely thought that being a sustainable business and embracing the goals was truly critical for a way forward.
And I just add, maybe perhaps build on some of the research that Richard's done and talked about here. Of course, some business leaders will feel the natural pull to take a broader responsibility, and some are being pushed. And it's this expectation, of course, that if business is trusted and business is viewed as being able to act with some velocity, particularly when some other institutions may be bogged down and not able to act as quick or as directly to have impact, more and more are. And then you have the push. You have more expectations around ESG reporting, more transparency. You have more customers and investors expecting more of business. So I think the trend line here is positive, and companies will find their own way, and there are lots of foundational ways to do it. One of the things that Salesforce started over 20 years ago and thousands of other companies have done is the Pledge 1% model, which is super easy to implement. 1% of your employee time, 1% of your product, and 1% of your profit. That can be very de minimis when you're first starting, but if you continue with it and you scale, then it's very significant over time. And so it's just one way to do it, but I think more and more companies are recognizing how important this is.
Go ahead, Richard.
The urgent need for quality information. This is a next task for business. The media is shrinking because of economics and politics, and people aren't listening to each other. Therefore, my employer is the most trusted institution, then my employer has to give quality information out so that employees can make good decisions about vaccination or other things.
That's a great point. We only have a few seconds left. I'd like to go around the horn very quickly and ask each of you, if you had to pick one the most important ingredients for a successful partnership cross-sector, what would that be? And anyone can jump in.
Well, I'll go first. I mean, I think it's really important just to build really strong multi-stakeholder partnerships. That works also by helping to co-create solutions and put humanity, put people at the center, builds for a great partnership.
Eric?
I'd say alignment, listening, understanding, determining how you can move together and stay committed.
Last but not least.
Yeah, get out of your classic swim lane. You know, the mandate for a business, for example, is information. It's also to be activist, and those are classically government and media. And so don't be constrained by what has been. Be determined to solve.
I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. This has been wonderful. I wish we had more time. Thank you for yours, and look forward to seeing more on the Concordia Summit. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.